So, Thanksgiving is officially over and the Christmas season is in full swing. Christmas is one of the biggest holidays of the year. But the question is, what are you supposed to believe about Christmas? Well, that's what we're going to talk about today. Well, winter is officially here. It is December 1st, and it's not Christmas yet. So you have around 24 days left to shop and to decorate and to get ready for Christmas. But one of the things that we're going to talk about here at Choose the Way is why do we even celebrate Christmas? And we're going to look at some of the myths surrounding that. And one of the myths we're going to look at today is whether or not Jesus was born on December 25th. So the simple and easy answer to that question, was Jesus born on December 25th, is probably not. However, you know that we can't just leave it at that. We have to at least give you a little bit of background information and let you know why that's probably not true. Now, if you were to go all the way back to 2007, a guy by the name of Peter Joseph did a documentary type movie called The Zeitgeist. And in that documentary movie, he tried to compare, in a way to blatantly attack Jesus and his person, he went ahead and tried to compare a lot of the other gurus or ancient mythological characters of the past to Jesus. And he specifically tried to compare the birth and some of the things that Jesus did in his life, as well as his crucifixion and resurrection, to these different people. And one of the things that he continues over and over again to say, for instance, he says that Buddha was born on December 25th and Jesus was born on December 25th. He tries to say that Mithra was born on December 25th and Jesus was born on December 25th. He tries to say that Horus or Zoroaster was born on December 25th and Jesus was born on December 25th. However, any good student of the Bible and any good student of history would be able to tell you that wherever he got his information from, it was very flawed, because almost no one believes that Jesus was born specifically on December 25th. So let's just take you back. There actually were some early church fathers, as I did some research, church leaders, a guy by the name of Tertullian of Carthage, back in 200 CE. Pope Gregory was known to have written a letter to a missionary in Britain telling him specifically about some calculations that some of these early church fathers had made. Augustine possibly reported that he believed this. And what they believed was they took and they calculated the time of Jesus' crucifixion, or the date of Jesus' crucifixion, which would have probably been around the 14th of Nisan. And so that's on obviously their calendar there. But if you were to bring it into our calendar, March 25th would have been that date. And so they said that that's also was in coordination with his conception. So they believed that the same day Jesus died was the same day that he was conceived, on March 25th. So then, if you calculate March 25th and you go 9 months, you get to December 25th. And so these earlier church followers have been known to have reported that that is why they believe that Jesus probably was born on December 25th. Now, if you were to look at that, you would say, okay, that's fun for them to do that, but even an average person would look at that and go, well, most women don't give birth exactly 9 months to the day that the conception happened. Usually they're a couple weeks early, a couple weeks late, all that kind of stuff. So this in no way, no matter how specific their calculations are, it in no way tells us that Jesus was born on December 25th. If the truth be told, we have no idea the very day that Jesus was born. We might know the time, maybe the month, or at least within a few months of when he was born, but there's no way to tell the exact day that he was born. However, people continue to keep trying. Matter of fact, some scholars will take you to Luke chapter 2, verse 8, and they will say, listen, if you look at the context of Luke chapter 2, verse 8, the shepherds were out in the fields and they were keeping watch over their flocks by night. So if they're keeping watch over their flocks by night, that means the flocks are out in the field. And if it was December, especially December 25th, that would have been super cold for the sheep and the shepherds to be out in the fields. They probably would have had them inside their barns or some kind of covering to keep out of the cold weather. So that means it probably was not in December when this whole thing went down, where the angel appeared to the shepherds and they went to see the baby in the manger that was wrapped in swaddling cloths and laying there. And then you go to Matthew chapter 2, specifically in verse 10, when the wise men, they come to visit the baby. And they visit the child Jesus in a house, not in a place like a stable or a cave where the baby was born, but in a house. Which means that in Matthew chapter 2, if you begin to look at the context of Matthew chapter 2, when the wise men saw the star first appear, and then they began to travel, and they get to Herod's place, and Herod says, well, you go find the baby, and then you come and tell me where he is, because I want to worship him too. And then they finally get to the house, and the star is over top of the house, and they go in, and they give these wonderful gifts to the baby Jesus. We know that that is at least 6 months, if not a year and a half to 2 years after Jesus has been born. So even the Star of Bethlehem would be a really difficult indicator as to when exactly the birth of Jesus happened. But then you have Revelation chapter 12. And scholars take a look at Revelation 12, and Revelation 12 is a very interesting text when it comes to the birth of Jesus. Because you have these astrological signs that are in the sky according to John in Revelation chapter 12. You have Virgo, or the Virgin, who is in the sky, and she is clothed with the sun, and the moon is at her feet, and around her she has a crown of 12 stars around her, and she was with child, and she cried out and was giving birth to the child. So what's interesting here is that according to a guy by the name of Joseph Dumond, and I believe his site is sightedmoon.com. So that's sightedmoon.com. And if you go to his site, you can find this information out. But he believes that according to these astrological signs, and you can go to a place called Stellarium, Stellarium.org. And there you can look at the constellations, and you can walk the constellations all the way back to where Joseph Dumond says that on Wednesday, September 11th of 3 BC, at approximately between 6:15 and 7:45 p.m. is when Jesus was probably born. So he believes that according to this constellation in Revelation chapter 12, and by going back and looking at the constellations all the way back, that you could say that Jesus was probably born sometime between 6:15 and 7:45 p.m. on Wednesday, September 11th, 3 BC. Now, if that's the case, that's really interesting in the fact that as Americans, we understand that September 11th holds a very significant meaning for all of us in our history. But then you have the guy by the name of Dr. Colin Nicole, and he wrote a book here just recently within the last 2 or 3 years known as The Great Christ Comet. And in The Great Christ Comet, he explains Matthew chapter 2 in detail with the description of this star, and he believes that this star was actually a comet, possibly a comet like Halley's Comet or the Hale-Bopp Comet. And he goes into he begins to try and describe this as a comet being something that doesn't just show up in the sky and then it's gone. But for instance, like the Hale-Bopp Comet, in July of 1995, it was first seen by a gentleman, and when he first saw this and reported it, it wasn't for about 18 months later that it finally disappeared out of our sky. So we were able to see it for around 18 months. And so he says that possibly when it was the rise, if you look at Matthew chapter 2, where the wise men said, as we saw the rise of the star. And so he believes, and of course he goes into greater detail, he believes that this star that the wise men saw was not just a star, it was a comet. And the comet raced across the sky, and they saw that, and they watched it, and they followed it, and eventually they followed it to his house. Now, I don't think that this gentleman gives any specific dates, but he does try to describe that this astrological type of phenomenon that was in the sky was not just a star that seated itself over top of the house at one time, but it was a comet that these wise men were actually following. Now, with all of this said, you and I can conclude a couple things. One of the things we can conclude is that Jesus was probably born between 4 and 2 BC, which is before Christ, so between 4 and 2 BC. And it was probably within one of the 12 months on our calendar, January through December. Probably more than likely a few months before December or somewhere in that time period. Some people may say actually a couple months after December, but it's somewhere in that range. But more than likely it was not on December 25th. So then the question arises then, if Jesus really wasn't born on December 25th, then why in the world do we celebrate Christmas on December 25th? Well, the truth be told, most early Christian believers didn't celebrate Jesus' birth at all from what we know when it comes to early writings. We have no early writers like Irenaeus, who was another early church father, Tertullian, who we mentioned earlier, all the way back to 130 to 225 CE, which is Common Era. We don't have anything written from them that talks about early Christians celebrating the birth of Jesus. And we know, according to the scriptures, that we don't have any kind of celebrations of the birth of Jesus as well. It wasn't until around 400 Common Era that Augustine of Hippo mentioned a Christian group celebrating on December 25th. And then you have some people that believe that if you go back and you look at Rome, and Rome's standard of their celebrations and their festivals, one of their big ones was the celebration of the sun god, which took place during the winter solstice, December 21st through the 25th, somewhere around there. And they would have this huge festival because they believed that the sun god, who had been weakened, was now beginning to gain its strength back, and so they would have this big festival. And so this, of course, was a pagan ritual that was celebrated during this time, specifically on December 25th. And these festivals were to celebrate that the sun god was getting their power back, or its power back. And so it is said that possibly early Christians during that time took it upon themselves and adopted December 25th as the day to celebrate the birth and the coming and the advent of their Savior, Jesus Christ. Now, whether that's true or not, I don't know. It's a thought and a theory. However, it wasn't until the 1100s that we actually see in the writings that there appears to be deliberate celebration concerning Christmas and the birth of Jesus. So what do you do with all this information? Because in the end, we don't have any specific facts according to the date of Jesus' birth or why we actually celebrate Christmas. And we know that the early Puritans, according to history and some of the writings, the early Puritans in this world, they didn't want anything to do with Christmas and celebration. They tried to have it outlawed, and eventually Christmas made its way into our lifestyles, and now everybody seems to just celebrate Christmas. So maybe the question is not why do we celebrate Christmas, but maybe the question is best phrased, why do you celebrate Christmas? For the Christian, it should be a no-brainer. Christmas is not just a day that we take and set aside to remember what God has done for us, but it is an entire lifetime of us understanding the gift that God has given us in His Son, Jesus Christ. The fact that we, as God's creation, have chosen death. We have chosen that God's way is not the best way for us, and so we have rebelled against that and walked away, and therefore we have chosen to live apart from God. And if God is life and you choose to live apart from that, then you choose to live in death. And God told us that's exactly what would happen according to the Bible, but we have chosen it, all of us. And yet God, in His infinite mercy and grace and kindness, chose one time, one place in history, He chose to come down and put on flesh and be with us. That's the word Emmanuel that the Old Testament prophet wrote about and then Matthew referred to. The word Emmanuel, God with us. And then He came down and put on flesh, and then He lived a perfect life, and then He took our place in death, so that you and I, if we will put our trust in Him and give our lives to Him and let Him transform us and get us back into right relationship with our God and our Creator, then we can have eternal life. You see, that's what Christmas is all about. That's what the story of a God who loves his creation is all about. And it's not celebrated just on one day. It's celebrated every day of our lives. Those of us who believe that God loved us so much that he became flesh, became one of us, so that he might take our place in death, so that we could have life.